They didn't just survive segregation. They outplayed it. In the heart of the Jim Crow South, behind closed doors and barred windows, they built a system of wealth that the world wasn't ready to see. Private banks, silent partners, shadow investors, doctors, pilots, lawyers, oil drillers, all black, circulating millions, inside a city that wasn't supposed to exist. And then, it burned. June 1st, 1921. The sky over Greenwood turned orange. Firebombs from above, rifles from below. And in the smoke, something else vanished. The records, the ledgers, the evidence. They called it a riot. But what if it was a cover-up? What if the real story was never about destruction, but about what they tried to erase? This isn't just about loss. It's about secrets buried in ashes. About a blueprint that was too powerful to let live. A community that cracked the code of black generational wealth and paid the price. This isn't just history. It's a warning and a clue. Want to uncover how they did it? Subscribe, because we're about to retrace the codes they used to protect black wealth. Comment: do you think that kind of system could survive today? Share this video before this chapter is erased again. Greenwood wasn't a myth. It was a strategy. And some secrets refused to stay buried. In the heart of the Jim Crow South, behind the veil of segregation and racial terror, something extraordinary was happening. Greenwood, just a few square blocks, became one of the richest black communities in America. Doctors, lawyers, educators, entrepreneurs. Not just surviving, but thriving. But how? How did the descendants of enslaved people, less than 50 years out of bondage, build a financial empire in a system designed to erase them? What secret did they know? And why has that story barely survived? They didn't build Greenwood in public. They built it in whispers. Behind the laughter and jazz, there was calculation, a hidden system pulsing beneath the streets. Every handshake, every favor, every church sermon carried a coded message: keep the dollar moving. It started with the women. Mothers who'd spent decades cleaning white households began saving pennies in coffee tins. They formed circles, 5 women, then 10, each promising to lend a portion of their pooled savings to whoever needed it most that month. They called it the hand. Today, economists call it a rotating credit association. It wasn't charity. It was strategy. Because banks didn't lend to them, so they became their own banks. A black shoemaker might borrow from the circle to open a shop. Once his profits came in, he'd lend back double. The circle grew, then multiplied. And by 1915, Greenwood had what white Tulsa bankers called a miracle of liquidity. It wasn't a miracle. It was organization. Doctors invested in hotels. Teachers opened grocery stores. Barbers funded bricklayers. Every success became someone else's seed money. And they kept their code simple: $1, 60 hands. Every black dollar was to touch at least 60 black hands before leaving Greenwood. That was their firewall. Their defense against a world that wanted them broke. But not everyone liked the way the numbers looked. Rumors began to circulate, not in Greenwood, but in Tulsa's downtown clubs. White businessmen couldn't understand it. How are they doing this? They whispered over whiskey. How can a Negro hotel afford electric lights when ours can't? The answer was discipline. No wasted wealth. No flaunting. No leaks. The entire community moved like a network, invisible, precise, and dangerous to those who built their power on dependency. And yet, inside the beauty of that system was its greatest risk. Because codes only work if everyone follows them. And the moment outsiders discovered them, the system became a threat. They thought they were just building prosperity. But in truth, they were hacking the American economy from the inside out. They say Greenwood thrived because of its businesses. But that's only half true. What made it invincible, at least for a while, was the network. It wasn't written down. It didn't need to be. It pulsed through church basements, barbershops, jazz halls, and Masonic lodges. A doctor might pass a note to a pastor. Client can't pay for surgery. Send the butcher's son, I'll take his debt in beef. The butcher nodded. The son was healed. The ledger was balanced, in meat, not money. Trust was the currency. It was a lattice of cooperation, stronger than any contract. Each person a node. Each favor a thread. Tug one, the whole web moved. They shared clients. Shared suppliers. Shared secrets. No middlemen. No margin lost to strangers. Every dollar was mapped like a blood cell, flowing only where it kept the body alive. And at the heart of the web, a shadow council. Business owners, ministers, teachers, even teenagers. They met late at night, away from the storefronts and lighted porches. No speeches. No hierarchy. Just questions. Who needs help? Who's leaking money? Who's drawing attention? Because they knew something that many communities forget. Prosperity invites predators. So the network made rules. No flashy cars outside Greenwood. No boasting in white newspapers. No political agitation, at least not in public. They weren't cowards. They were playing chess. And while Tulsa slept, Greenwood moved. They bought up land using white intermediaries. They built homes using blueprints swapped across churches. They even invested in oil, quietly, using shell companies with white frontmen. And the profits funneled back through the network. Clean, quiet, powerful. To outsiders it looked like luck. To insiders it was orchestration. But every system has its flaw. The stronger the network grew, the more visible it became. By 1920, Greenwood wasn't just prosperous. It was profitable. A freight train of cash moving through a segregated city, but untouched by white control. That's when the real enemies began to whisper. They're not just doing well. They're doing too well. And from that whisper came the plan. Not a riot. Not a reaction. But a removal. One spark. One accusation. And the network would be forced to surface, to defend, to explain, to fight. And doing so, it would expose itself. They knew the rules of the outside world were rigged. So Greenwood wrote its own. Not in law books, but in behavior. Not in government, but in principle. Rule 1. Circulate wealth internally. A dollar entered Greenwood. It didn't leave quickly. It bought bread from a black baker. Shoes from a black cobbler. Insurance from a black-owned firm. Funeral services, furniture, even legal defense, all sourced within. That dollar circulated 36 times before exiting. Compare that to today, where in most black communities, it exits in 6 hours. Rule 2. Own, don't rent. They didn't just run businesses, they owned the land beneath them. Real estate wasn't just a place to sleep. It was security, collateral, leverage. And the deeds, often split between family members. If one was targeted, jailed, or harassed, the land couldn't be taken without a fight. They passed these plots in coded wills. Some used church tithe rolls as disguised ledgers. Others traded land for services, clean, tax-free, and hidden from predatory eyes. Rule 3. Guard the secrets. Not every success was advertised. Storefronts might appear modest, but the safes behind them held small fortunes. One grocer paid his staff in gold coins, untraceable, uninflatable. Barbershops used ledgers that listed hats and shines as cover for loans and trades. Even teenage boys running errands might be carrying more than groceries. Sometimes they were couriers for cash, documents, or whispered agreements. Greenwood wasn't just thriving. It was camouflaged. Rule 4. Train the next generation. Quietly. Boys didn't just sweep the barbershop. They watched how clients paid. How books were balanced. How small talk concealed large transactions. Girls weren't just selling candy in the corner store. They were learning margins, markup, supply and demand. By 15, many Greenwood children understood compound interest better than most white bankers. Education was everywhere. In living rooms, behind counters, in hymn books that doubled as business manuals. They weren't just making money. They were building a culture of literacy, financial and otherwise. Rule 5. Never depend on a single gatekeeper. One bank could be shut down. So they created 3, and used informal credit when none would lend. One newspaper could be censored. So they built networks of pastors, whispers in pews, and messages stitched into quilts. They diversified everything, from income streams to security plans. When laws blocked access to capital, they pooled cash in fraternal orders and women's savings clubs. When businesses were denied insurance, they created mutual aid funds. If a home burned down, the community rebuilt it. If a widow needed cash, 5 shop owners would quietly cover her rent. Without paperwork. Without charity. Just code. They called it taking care of our own. But it was more than community. It was resilience engineering. Because they knew, wealth is not what you earn. It's what you can protect. They weren't just leaders. They were sentinels. Men in 3-piece suits. Women in pressed white blouses. Preachers with calloused palms and ledgers hidden behind pulpits. To outsiders, they looked ordinary. But behind the curtains, they were Greenwood's firewall, guarding not just wealth, but the codes that created it. 1. The banker who trusted no one. His name wasn't shouted. He didn't stand at rallies. But in his vaults lay the fortunes of over 200 families. He didn't believe in Wall Street. He believed in people. He lent based on handshake agreements, but only after watching how someone walked into his office. Did they hesitate before sitting? Did their shoes shine? Did they ask for too much, too fast? He rarely said no. He simply offered less than they asked, to see their reaction. And he had a rule: never lend without teaching. Every loan came with 3 visits. 1 before. 1 after. 1 6 months in. He didn't just hand out money. He built borrowers into business people. His name is gone from most textbooks. But some of Tulsa's wealthiest black heirs, those who still hold land today, can trace it back to his quiet approvals. 2. The women with ledgers in their laps. Greenwood's women were never just behind the counter. They were behind the balance sheets. They ran savings clubs disguised as sewing circles. Each week, women dropped in coins wrapped in cloth. 1 envelope per person. Every month, 1 woman received the pot, to start a business, pay down a mortgage, or send a child to Howard. There was no bank interest. No risk. Only trust. And spreadsheets written by hand. They sold pies to pay off medical debt. Braided hair to buy stocks. Taught daughters to hide silver coins beneath floorboards, just in case. If you followed the money in Greenwood, it often led to a backroom, a handwritten journal, and a woman humming while adding up the future. 3. The preacher who counted souls and capital. His sermons echoed fire and thunder. But his real work began after the Amen. He kept 2 books. 1 for the church. 1 for the community. He knew which widow needed a roof. Which child needed tuition. Which shopkeeper missed rent. He collected tithes, and redistributed them like venture capital. Backed 2 barbershops. 1 print shop. 3 corner stores. He didn't ask for repayment. He asked for jobs created. His pulpit was an economic engine. And when white bankers asked how his congregation grew so fast, he smiled and said, "Because faith isn't just in God. It's in each other." 4. The educator who trained the code. She taught typing by day. But after school, she gathered 5 students at a time, to learn interest rates, margins, contract law. She used chalkboard math to explain rent-to-own traps. Turned church hymns into mnemonic devices for investment strategies. And every report card came with a question. What will you build with what you know? She once turned a classroom into a mock stock exchange. Gave each child 10 fake dollars. 2 months later, one had flipped it into 50, trading candy and copy paper between classmates. He grew up to open Greenwood's first credit bureau. 5. The invisible guards. Not all guardians wore collars or calculators. Some were drivers, who memorized routes to get children to school safely when threats emerged. Some were butchers, who refused bribes to overcharge widows and single mothers. Some were janitors, who smuggled documents out of City Hall before property deeds mysteriously vanished. They worked in shadows, Not because they were afraid, but because they understood. In a world that undervalues you, wealth must be protected like a secret. And secrets, when shared wise, become legacy. They had wealth. They had a strategy. They had vision. But even fortresses built on gold can crumble from within. In Greenwood, the streets bustled with black excellence, doctors in pressed coats, bankers calculating interest by hand, entrepreneurs flipping profits into property. But beneath the polished surface, whispers had begun to spread. And whispers are louder than gunshots when no one is listening. Some said the bankers were playing favorites, extending credit to their kin, shutting out others. Others murmured that landowners had begun pricing homes too high for the average worker. Class lines, invisible but growing sharper, began to divide the community they had built together. There were rifts between the old money, the freedmen who rose with land grants and grit, and the new arrivals, chasing Greenwood's promise like gold fever. Some believed in slow growth. Others wanted to take risks, to scale fast, to invest outside the walls of Greenwood, to mingle with white capital quietly. The women, powerful business owners, teachers, and community organizers, were often overlooked in public meetings, even as they ran half the economy from behind the curtains. And the youth. They were restless. They didn't want savings accounts. They wanted cars, clubs, leverage, fast money, fast status. And then there were the outsiders, white businessmen who offered joint ventures, contracts too good to be true, land deals that came with strings, and surveillance. Greenwood had become wealthy enough to attract envy, not just from outside, but from within. A grocer who once sold on credit now refused it. A barber who owned 3 shops suddenly disappeared, debts unpaid. A prominent pastor warned from the pulpit, "Be vigilant, the wolves are not only at the gates, some wear our skin." By 1920, the armor of Greenwood had begun to crack, not from violence, but from vulnerability. Greed, ego, division. And as history would prove time and again, empires rarely fall from invasion alone. Sometimes all it takes is one spark. They burned the buildings. They buried the ledgers. They silenced the voices. But what they couldn't kill was the blueprint. Greenwood wasn't just a place, it was a strategy. It was wealth structured with intention. Power cloaked in community. Freedom disguised as enterprise. And though the fire consumed the surface, beneath the ashes, the roots remain. A legacy denied, but not erased. We talk about what was lost. 40 blocks. 1,200 homes. Dozens of black businesses. $200 million in today's money. But what was taken was bigger than that. It was momentum. It was proof. Proof that black wealth could scale, without permission. Proof that economic power didn't have to wear someone else's name. They didn't just destroy a town. They tried to erase the possibility. But the story didn't end in 1921. Some families rebuilt, quietly. Others moved away, their stories carried by whispers and wills. But Greenwood was never a fluke. It was the result of codes, of strategy, of community investment. And those lessons, they still apply. Because the question isn't whether black wealth can rise again. The question is whether we're ready to rebuild it, this time with fireproof foundations. If you were moved by this story, don't let it end here. Share it, study it, and subscribe to this channel. Challenge the silence around it. Because history doesn't repeat itself, unless we forget it. And maybe, just maybe, Black Wall Street wasn't a chapter. It was a blueprint.